Hey, this is former Blue Devil lineman Matt Skura. You're listening to Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast. Go Duke, go ACC.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast. My name is Joey Weaver. He is Mark Ennis. Mark, welcome back to the show. Great having you back. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I appreciate you having me back. It's always good. It's like a time, like a marker. Like I know, like we're getting close to the season being here. I'm doing more of these and doing this one. Like with you, I think it's like the 4th or 5th year we've done this, right?
It's been a while. You've been incredibly gracious with your time. Mark, host of The Drive on 93.9 The Ville in Louisville, here to help us preview the Louisville Cardinals. Coming off a big year one with Jeff Brom, and it did. I think it kind of sputtered a little bit at the end, but it was a strong start. Good year one, a year that we came in with a lot of expectations, and they lived up to them. I did want to start, Mark, from kind of like a high level. I'm curious to get your take on this, both maybe Louisville at an institutional level, the school president and the AD and such like that, but also to some degree the fan base. I'm curious to where they see themselves in what I would call like the pecking order within the ACC, and really kind of what I'm talking about there is, and I think Clemson has probably elevated where they were, in the last 15 years, under the Dabo tenure. You go look at even Florida State a few years ago, really going through it after Jimbo left, but they would have still considered themselves one of the premium brands in the ACC. I'm curious, kind of a little bit separated from results on the field, where would Louisville see themselves in the ACC's pecking order? Are they a top 4 or 5 kind of program, somewhere in the middle? What would you say to that?
I think Louisville fans see themselves as they should be perennially top 5-ish in the ACC, and I think it could be anywhere in that number. Because I think Louisville fans think they are in that group that should annually be as good as anybody else who doesn't have the natural advantages.
Mm-hmm.
So there's Florida State and Miami and Clemson in particular. They really should. They have more of just the natural proximity, history, all that stuff, more than
huge
everybody else. Everybody else, right? So they ought to be good, and really it ought to they should be good unless somebody's mucking it up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think NC State and Georgia Tech and Louisville and Virginia Tech are schools that's if we get everything right, can be as good as anybody. But it's it's just a lot harder work. I think Louisville fans think they should be in that group who can be as good as anybody, but it's obviously way harder to do. And so Louisville fans have an extremely high amount of they want it to be good. Mm-hmm. And I think it's basketball really fueled all of that. They're hey, if we can do it in basketball, we should be able to do it in anything.
Yeah.
And they've come close, but they have that. But I think people take the fact that they have that and maybe get them the wrong impression that Louisville fans don't understand there's going to be some variance year in and year out. I think Louisville fans know that, but I think Florida State, Clemson, Miami should be up there, and Louisville thinks you should immediately be talking about them and NC State and Virginia Tech and whoever else you think fits in that group. I think Louisville fans think they understand the natural advantage places and that they belong kind of right below that.
Makes sense. And I mean, it's the reason I was thinking about it again, as we move into this new era of college football and continued realignment and thinking about what does the sport look like in the future, and knowing that I believe that Louisville's fan base is a fairly particularly confident one, believe in the institution and believe in what they've got there. But also realizing that historically Louisville, has really been probably the biggest climber of almost any school going through conferences.
Louisville and TCU. Louisville and TCU.
Yeah, I mean, 20 years ago, you're a CUSA team. You went through the Big East, and even before then, I mean, it was. Yeah. So it's just, I think it's been kind of an interesting, pathway, and yet I don't disagree with you. I think kind of in that second tier where, within reason, I think everything kind of functioning well. Yeah, you're probably one of the top half of the ACC within all reason.
And I think built in, Louisville does have abnormally good or abnormally high or high level or whatever, they have punched above their weight with coaches and quarterbacks. And if there's anything that you want to pick, if Louisville's history is just like filled with kind of replacement level quarterbacks and head coaches, then there's no way they're where they are right now. But like Bobby Petrino is insane and evil, but brilliant.
Yeah.
And John L. Smith is crazy, but for a stretch he was as clever as anybody, as an offensive mind. And Bobby, again, second time coaching somebody like Lamar, and Charlie Strong. That's like these are great coaches that Louisville was able to sort of get in on the ground floor with a lot of these guys. And then quarterbacks, like there's really no explanation for Louisville having Brian Brom and Jeff Brom and Browning Nagel and Chris Redmond and Lamar Jackson and Teddy Bridgewater and all these
Johnny Unitas. I mean,
Johnny Unitas, Stephon LaForce, all these guys who are Brian Brom, spectacular quarterbacks, like out of this world good quarterback. They have there's no explanation for that, but they do, and I think it's really allowed them to, what I've always said, like fake their age. Like that's a great group of quarterbacks over like a century, and Louisville really had it in about 30 years.
Yeah.
So I think both of those things have really helped a lot. And it puts, the funny thing is I think Jeff Brom realizes that there's like a pressure to not only win, but kind of be a certain way. And he sees that. He feels that.
Yeah. Well, famously the guy that at the start of that XFL game, is there air in my lungs? Let's play football.
Still that guy.
Yeah.
That's still that dude.
Ready to cut a WWE promo at any moment. You love that.
Yep.
A guy like that with a little bit of a bravado and again, had a good year last year, and you figure that kind of continues this year. I think the schedule gets a little tougher. We'll get into that in a few minutes, but one of the things I wanted to ask you, Mark, looking at this team as compared to last year's team, and one of the things we talked about last year was some of the transfers being brought in to kind of boost that program from day one. This year, again, I think there's about 30 in, 30 out transfer-wise on this roster, and that is, to me, that is a huge influx of just players. There's talent in, talent out. But I look at this and it's like, this is like the second most transfers coming in to any program in the country. The only one that has more is Colorado. Yeah. Which, has its own ball wax. But I'm curious from what you've seen, from what you understand, is this like heavy transfer reliance? Is this just year one, year two, kind of get it started under Jeff Brom? Or is the thought here that this might be somewhat of more of a longer term program strategy to work from?
I don't think this heavy of transfers is the long-term strategy, but I think it is a combination of two things. I think one, I do think they're comfortable with transfers. Like I think they're, and in particular, I think Jeff really likes guys with 1 year of something to prove. Like he has talked about that, wanting some older guys with 1 year. Hey, we have a role just for you. You can show out here. And, they feel like Jamari Thrash and some other guys, kind of did that. So they do believe in transfers. They wouldn't like the turnover to not be so high. But I think Jeff has also said kind of explicitly, it's our duty as coaches for them to be as good as they can be now. And that, sure, like, I think the portal has tilted a lot of coaches' willingness to kind of do anything with the long term in mind. I think a lot of coaches just see it as like, no, what's the best answer for right now? And if there's another issue that comes up later, I'll address that when it's right now then. I think that Jeff really does feel like I'm going to err on the side of sort of discontinuity because my job is to be as good as I can be right now only. And I will say, like, in back-to-back years, I have felt like last year it was the offensive line. This year it's the front seven, really, that, they're good. They're solid. We'll see what happens. And then they've brought in like 3 and 4 more guys at that position. And I've been like, man, like they're not screwing around. And I just think Jeff views it as like, my job is to be as good as we can be next year. And that now like the tie goes to the short term instead of the long term. And I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. And especially, not only the transfer thing, but also obviously, call it NIL, but being able to pay the players. That makes a big difference in kind of the way that all this works and the way that business is handled. And maybe somewhat to that end, I think a couple of the more high profile instances over the offseason, you had guys like Penny Boone and Tyler Barron who transferred in and then transferred out as well. Like I think by the end of the spring, things like that happened. Does that give you any sort of pause as to, I don't know, program culture, or are the coaches selling something that they're not able to deliver on? Like those things happening, and especially with multiple players, it kind of makes me wonder, like what happened there, or why did this come about the way that it did?
I do think there are some lessons to be learned from this, and my understanding is kind of there are some takeaways. I think, like, just thinking big picture about NIL and recruiting and stuff. I think that there are more guys ending up, signing at places and going to places without really much. It's just basically like highest bidder, and there really isn't
Mm,
much background work done in either direction.
mm,
And I think that really is uh, not what happened like exactly with both of them, but that is the unifying kind of symptom between those two situations. There is they didn't do good enough homework on each other. Penny Boone's a nice running back, but Louisville's got pretty nice running back room, and basically I think Penny Boone thought he was coming here, he was going to get 95% of the carries,
mm-hmm,
and after spring was getting like 40% of the carries, but in a room that was pretty deep, and he basically was like, I'm out. And the Tyler Bear situation, I think he misrepresented how healthy he was, and Louisville
mm,
was pretty not thrilled about that, and let it be known, and basically had a bad experience kind of with his agent and that whole thing,
mm,
and kind of everybody associated with him left.
yeah,
And yeah, I think we're all kind of getting our sea legs in terms of like that kind of recruiting that's basically like this transactional. I think
mm-hmm,
Louisville's just, I don't think that there's anything that's really going to change. I think Louisville's going to roll the dice that they can get more of those right than not. And if it
mm-hmm.
means this happens, then the next time, those guys stick, and it makes them as competitive with Clemson and Florida State. Like, I think Louisville's, even with the rules changing and everything, Louisville's still got some dice to roll on some guys every year. That's always been true.
Yeah, that's historically been the case. Guys with a couple of character concerns or whatever, but are really high upside plays. And I mean, I've
Yeah.
seen that in football, I've seen that in basketball, I've seen it in a lot of
It's
different
the Bucks with
places.
Antonio Brown,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah,
Win a Super Bowl and then he quits in the middle of a game.
yeah, you take the Twitter account with the ring, so that's fine.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
um, again, kind of not to keep harping on the transfer thing, but one of the other key transfers is Tyler Shuck. He's going to be the quarterback for the year. It looks like. First of all, correct me if I'm wrong. He is the starter. That's been established at this point?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So, I mean, this is a guy who has been in college, I think, almost since I have been in college, and that was a decade ago. I'm a grown man by this point. I'm an old man. Um, he's been around a long time. He has, to my knowledge, basically never been able to finish a season. There have been several injury issues, but he's also a guy who's got a lot of talent. He's got arm talent. He's mobile. He's able to do a lot of things. Does the coaching staff feel like they're taking a risk here? Obviously, I would have to think with his health, and if he's not able to finish the season, how do we feel about the backup plan there? Is it Pierce Clarkson, or where do things stand with him?
Tyler Shuck is unquestionably, the starter, and to me looks really impressive. Like, you can see what they think they're getting in him. He's got a big arm. He's a big, strong, like central casting, handsome quarterback guy. But he's pretty athletic. Good arm, and I think where he distinguishes himself from Jack Plummer a year ago, not afraid to let it rip, like, is decisive. The first play of the spring game, he really throws one into a really tight window, and Chris Bell takes it, I think 70 yards for a touchdown or something. Like, it's, and you can see, like, all right, there it is. I see what they're getting at. And he really does. He's head and shoulders, the best quarterback on the roster, but he has injury issues. The only thing I would say about his injury issues is they really do appear to be like terrible luck.
Mm-hmm.
Tackled the wrong way, you get the clavicle. Tackled the wrong way, breaks leg. But I will say it is kind of fascinating that I've never seen coaches just basically be like, he's not allowed to run. Like they just, in offenses that he's played in at Oregon and Texas Tech both, like they did have quarterback run components to their offense, and he did it and got hurt. And so Jeff Brom is basically like, that's true. He's not allowed to run. And I've really never seen a coach just say that, but like he's not allowed to run. There will be no running. He will slide. They will not call anything for him. But I will say, unlike last year where it seemed like it didn't matter what Jack Plummer did, he wasn't coming out because they didn't have faith in anybody else. I think they have faith in Pierce Clarkson.
Okay.
And he has come so incredibly far from true freshman, early enrollee. Look, he is tiny. He's a little guy. And he's like just your quintessential Baker Mayfield, little moxie guy, but he is that guy. And I think, his first play from scrimmage in the spring game was this bomb touchdown. I think over Quincy Riley, but it was the most decisive throw I've seen him make since he got here. He's totally healthy. I think Jeff Brom, I think, is playing a little motivation game with him a little bit, but he's the backup. And I think if Tyler Shuck struggles, I do think they will not hesitate to go to him. And the offense might change a little bit. But, unlike last year where it just seemed like it didn't matter what happened, Jack Plummer was staying in the game. I think if Tyler Shuck struggles, like they'll give Pierce Clarkson a chance to sort of get things moving. I think they will.
Yeah. That's another thing of like, again, guys that come in with such a pedigree or a bill of, that's a term I'm thinking of here, but it's not coming to me. Pierce Clarkson was a blue chip recruit, came in, had a lot of fanfare around him, but has really barely played since he's been in. And you start to wonder, like, how long of a clock do you have before he's starting to look elsewhere? But if Jeff Brom and that staff are able to manage those expectations and keep developing him and start to give him some time, I mean, that's the thing I start wondering is like, oh, you're going to bring in another transfer quarterback to play in front of him. Is he going to want to leave, or do you just not believe in him? But that's good to know that they're developing him and they would put him in if they need to. And again, Shuck, a guy that, as you mentioned, I mean, has had some bad luck in his career. And I think a little bit, I'm a Braves fan as well. They traded for Chris Sale, and some of the thought was like, oh, well, he's injury prone. And yes, the last couple of years, like he did have Tommy John, but he had two other injuries that were getting hit by a comebacker and falling off his bike. And it's like, neither of those things are repeatable, so I'm not worried about them happening again.
They're not chronic, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And he's right. He's not that either. I will say, but just, I don't know, whatever. The other quarterbacks stink.
Okay.
So if it's not one of these two, they're probably going to be in some trouble. Deuce Adams, the freshman that just came in, though, I like him. Like, I think he'll probably redshirt, he's got to put some weight on and stuff, but like he's got a little something in him. With regards to Pierce Clarkson, his dad is a quarterback and a quarterback like guru dude, and Dennis Erickson is his godfather, is Pierce Clarkson's godfather. And so, usually like the son of a former player, either dad is Craig James, and he's like an obnoxious helicopter dad, or he's like always on the coach's side. And Steve Clarkson is kind of more of a always on the coach's side. So I think Pierce is actually less likely to sort of cut and bait and and run, because this is like a whole marketing thing to them to come here. And they have seemed to embrace that from the get-go. So it makes sense to have like a phobia that he's going to leave if he doesn't show like more progress, but it really doesn't seem that way right now.
Yeah. And you love that, watching parents realizing that they're not just going to big time a staff and
Steve's a good dude. He really is.
Yeah. That's great. Regardless of which one's behind center, the weapons around them, the skill talent in particular, there is a lot to replace here between Jawar Jordan and Isaac Arendo getting drafted, Jamari Thrash, Kevin Coleman, Amari Huggins-Bruce, all gone. What do you see? And you mentioned earlier having a deep running back room. I mean, what are the names we need to know in the skill core really around them that are going to be filling those roles this year?
Yeah, this is I think the most interesting part of the team. These running backs, wide receivers, and let's say and tight ends is like a separate group, and that might be the place really where there's the biggest difference in the team. Jeff likes to run. Like, he has this reputation about airing it out and stuff, but like, he likes to run the ball. He loves slower developing kind of play action stuff and tight ends. He loves that stuff. And last year they had nothing. Jamar Johnson was a true freshman, and he was, he's a gift physically, but he was not ready. And then it was all kind of walk-ons. It was just a place where they didn't make huge strides in terms of roster turnover. And so tight end was just not, for an offense that ran the ball so well, you would have thought tight end, you really have a chance to eat a little bit, and they just didn't really have it. Well, they addressed that. They bring in Isaiah Cummings from Kentucky, who's a local Louisville kid. Jaleel Skinner comes in from Miami. They bring in Mark Redmond from San Diego State, and then Jamar Johnson comes back, and he looks to be. I was afraid he was going to grow into an offensive lineman, and instead he's in fantastic shape, really. And so that's really kind of the place where I'm looking for them to make the biggest leap. Is I think offensive line, they're going to be able to run the ball fine. But being able to play action and have weapons at tight end is going to be huge for them this year. But we didn't get to see Ja'Cory Brooks at wide receiver in the spring, the Alabama transfer. But I'm telling you, man, he was. I don't know what it's like to watch practice at Alabama, but like when there's an Alabama dude to practice at Louisville, you're like, oh. And he just kind of looks. He's another guy whose his reputation is he's great. We love him. He just can't stay healthy. And you see what they love about him. Like, he's really impressive. And I think if he stays healthy, and it's Ja'Cory Brooks and Chris Bell and Colin Lacey, the South Alabama transfer, in the slot, that's excellent. Like, that's much more dangerous than a year ago. Once Jamari Thrash got hurt, they were very tame at wide receiver. They were very tiny, and they were very tame, and they will be none of those things. With those three guys. And at running back, I don't think that they've got home run guys like they had last year with Jawar Jordan and Isaac Guerrero. But I think they've got 5 guys where there's just very little variation between any of them. And so, you can just kind of keep bringing the same dude over and over and over again. They've got a little variation. Kewan Brown's a redshirt freshman. He's one of those guys, he likes to make the tackle too. They brought in the transfer Donald Chaney. They bring back Maurice Turner. I think those 2 guys will get most of the carries. And then they've got a bunch of young running backs. Kewan Brown, Isaac Brown, Duke Watson. These guys, I think they could all play. It really would not shock me. I think there's much more of a chance that the home runs are at wide receiver instead of running back this year than last year. And I knew George Orton was a big play back, but I didn't know Guerrero would be. But no one ever emerged at wide receiver, and I think they've got some guys who can do that this year.
Well, and I wonder a little bit between upgrading your skill at wide receiver, definitely upgrading at tight end, and then I think you're upgrading your arm talent at quarterback.
I think so too. Yeah.
I think this offense might look a little bit more like a quote-unquote traditional Jeff Brom offense that we saw for years at Purdue than what we saw last year, which is, as you mentioned, a little bit more run-heavy. And not that he doesn't want to run the ball, but, I think
at Western, he ran the ball a lot too. He does. He's, in terms of demeanor and humanity and stuff, his influences, he's a lot like his dad, and he's a lot like Howard in terms of how he coaches people and treats people. He's a lot like Howard. But in terms of how he draws up an offense, he's the kind of the best of Bobby Petrino in terms of that stuff. And he likes to run the ball, and he will play action you, and he will get you with tight ends and stuff. And I feel like he probably hated last year. They won a lot of games, but that wasn't fun. He didn't get to do anything he really likes to, you know what I mean? He didn't get to do anything he really likes to do. And I do think he'll get to do more of that this year.
He was Bobby's quarterbacks coach and OC for a while, wasn't he?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Until he left, and then he stayed under Cragthorpe, and then that was a big falling out. He was one of the guys that Cragthorpe kind of scapegoated.
I see. And I remember looking back on
R.I.P. By the way,
right? Yeah, Steve Cragthorpe. I saw that a few days ago. That's
59.
A shame. Yeah,
unreal.
Parkinson's, right? That's early for that too, man.
Yeah.
I do remember thinking, and it's to your point, and I'm just going to reminisce here for a minute. I remember I think it was the 2015 bowl game against Texas A&M, where Lamar, I think, kind of got one of his first big starts, and I remember them running like double tight end, some nasty counter option stuff, and Lamar just broke 3-4 long touchdown runs kind of stuff. And you're watching this, and first of all, yeah, you're kind of having to rectify, like, this is a Bobby Petrino offense, which, as you mentioned, kind of like, you'd think of it as pass happy, but he's coming up with some sick run game stuff. And then you're thinking about that going into the 2016 season, and obviously that turns into a Heisman campaign for Lamar. And so I guess just thinking on that, as you mentioned, you think of it as a big passing attack, but they'll do some stuff in the run game too, and kind of just find whatever works. And that's what makes them a good offensive mind.
Yeah, at Western, I think he had 2,000-yard rushers in 1 year, and then if you go back, like the archetypal Purdue game when they beat Ohio State, like you go back and
Rondale
look, like
Moore
there's a lot of Rondale Moore plays, but like there's a whole lot of like really good runs in that game. Like they ran the ball like a lot. Like, so, I think to sum it all up, there's every reason to think it'll look a lot more like what he wants offense to look like this year with what they brought in, especially if everybody stays healthy.
Makes sense. I think for a Jeff Brom team last year, I mean, the offense was good, but maybe on a sneaky level, the defense might have been better.
It was.
And I look at that unit, and they bring back some of their really key guys. Ashton Gillott, your leading sacks guy. Quincy Riley, probably one of the best defensive backs in the country. It seems like this unit is in a good spot to run it back. Is there anywhere that we should be concerned on that side of the ball in your eyes? Let's take a quick second to remind you about Section103.com. It is the internet's premier place for all things wonderful Georgia Tech apparel. They've got t-shirts, they've got sweatshirts, they've got hoodies, they've got a short sleeve coach hoodie if you want to look like Coach Key. They've got onesies for babies. They've got all things for any man, woman, children, something for the whole family, all the Georgia Tech fans in your life. They need something from Section103.com. Use promo code GOACC for 10% off your first order. You can go get t-shirts supporting NIL efforts with guys like Haynes King and Zach Pyron. They've got shirts supporting the basketball team, the baseball team, the volleyball team, all sorts of wonderful Tech traditions, all sorts of things. Again, any Georgia Tech fan in your life, they need something from Section103.com. Once again, use promo code GOACC for 10% off your first order. I particularly love the Feliz Bobby Dodd sweatshirts. We got Christmas season coming up before you know it. You're going to want one of those for your holiday party. Go get it all at Section103.com. Huge shout out to Steven and the gang. Thank you so much to them for their support of the Basketball Conference podcast. We would love it if you guys would go show your support for Section103.com as well. Now, back to the episode.
Well, there aren't a lot, and that is pretty nice to say. Getting Quincy Riley and Ashton Gillott to come back, it totally changes, I think, your outlook on the defense. I think they went from the offense better be better, and you kind of got to hold your own. And you'll see, but you'll have some drop off with those two, to where you get just a out of this world pass rusher and a lockdown cover guy. Like, that's a great start, to a defense. And then they got Thor Griffith to come in, like really one of the highly sought after interior defensive lineman guys, and a number of other kind of edge guys on the other side. And then MJ Griffin comes back. I thought he was going to be a spectacular, like all conference kind of caliber guy at safety last year, and then he got hurt in the preseason. He'll be back. Like, they've just really, Stanquan Clark had an excellent true freshman season. He's going to be starting inside at linebackers. Like, there aren't a lot of places where there are issues. I think whoever the other edge is, kind of opposite Ashton Gillott, like, nothing would help this defense more than that person emerging, like whoever it is. Because you're never going to get double teamed. Ashton's just going to have the double teams. And so if TJ Capers or Adonijah Green or some of these other younger guys, Sadiq Clements, they're kind of more of an actual like lineman, but like somebody else on that opposite side can take advantage of the attention he's going to get. It really will be as well-rounded and sort of balanced at all three levels of a defense as we've had since maybe Charlie was here.
And he had some good defenses there.
Yeah, he had a few good defenses.
I was going to say, you talk about what you need up front, and that's probably what you hoped, that you look at the priors of what Tyler Barron would have been.
But that's exactly what they thought.
Health stuff, what you going to do? And that's stuff that, a lot of us sitting here reading Twitter, we're never going to know about it. But lot goes on the inside that you don't find out about until later. So that's unfortunate.
There's a lot of arranged marriages here with recruiting now too.
Yeah.
And then those don't always work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. A lot of hands in the cookie jar, I'd imagine. So,
yep.
Mark, I do want to talk about the schedule, talk about record predictions here. One of the things we talked about again last year, fairly forgiving, relatively easy schedule, and even in a couple of the tougher spots, Louisville was able to come away with wins. They beat Notre Dame, that kind of thing. They come away with the win week 1 against Georgia Tech in Atlanta in a comeback effort. I look at the schedule this year; it looks a little bit more daunting. I see road games at Notre Dame, having to go to Clemson, having to go to Kentucky at the end of the year. I see a home game against Miami and kind of a pivotal, interesting matchup. A little bit more difficult. Do you, I guess maybe just for starters, do you feel like the program is in a little bit better shape now than it was this time last year, looking down the barrel of this schedule?
I do. I think the depth at a number of spots is better than it was last year. There was a similar amount of motion in terms of the roster, but it does feel like last time was more frantic and this season was a bit more intentional. And I think maybe they did a little bit, I think they feel they did a lot better job with the quality of guys. Some of the lesser heralded front 7 transfers, Jordan Gerard, the kid that came from Minnesota, Tramel Logan coming in from USF kind of at the last moment. Renee was a Conga, I think, from Rutgers. They really like him. And these are guys, they probably won't play more than 15, 20 snaps, but you get 2 or 3 of them, and that keeps a whole game's worth of snaps off Ashton Gelati, right? Stuff like that. I think they feel like they've got more of that on the roster than they had a year ago. And they know these guys. They know these guys better than they did a year ago, where it was, it made sense to me that last year's team drifted towards being a better kind of zone running defense team, because that's what Scott Satterfield had kind of built. And I just think this one will look a lot less like that, because there's just a lot less of that DNA left than there was a year ago.
Makes total sense. One of the schedule quirks I see here, so this is a year with the way the calendar falls, everyone's going to get 2 bye weeks. Louisville gets a bye week September 14th. So you've played Austin Peay and Jacksonville State, and now we're going to take a week off to heal up from those games. And then their only other bye week is November 9th. So you basically then go and play, 7 games in a row, something like that.
Yeah.
And
that's the toughest stretch of the schedule, really, is that chunk, really.
That's your meat. Yeah, that's your ACC schedule for the most part. Road trip to Stanford. That seems like that's an interesting spot. Is there anywhere else here that you feel like could be a tricky trap game kind of on the schedule, just looking at where these games fall and not only time-wise, but also location-wise?
Yeah, we kind of had a little bit of this discussion on the show today. And, some of this depends on what you feel like really qualifies as a trap game. Like to me, somebody has to kind of be not that good for it to be a trap game. But I think maybe in terms of chronology, Georgia Tech before Notre Dame is
off of bye week.
And right. Well, I think those kind of balance each other out, right? Like you've got Notre Dame the week coming up, but you're coming off a bye week, so probably not that big of a deal. SMU the week after Notre Dame doesn't sound great to me. And then I think later on in the year, they play Miami and Clemson, but with Boston College on a Friday night on the road in between. It screams one of those obnoxious ACC team that shouldn't do this is going to do this, kinds of games to me. So like that one, I think is in terms of just a one that you look at that they shouldn't lose, that if they do, you'd be like, I knew it. It's that one. It was the Pitt game last year. It's that one this year for me.
I was going to say, I was looking at that, and then 2 weeks prior, the road trip to Virginia the week before Miami. I was like,
Louisville never plays well at Virginia.
No, Georgia Tech doesn't either. It's like a House of Horrors situation of just you can always be the better team, but either play poorly or just straight up lose there. And that's
Yeah, it's like the Bermuda Triangle. Like you just go there, and it doesn't matter what it is. Your team's gonna like Lamar, like the Heisman year where they, like they had to score on the last drive of the game to win that game.
yeah.
Like they never play well there ever.
Yeah. So those are the two spots, especially that like I get nervous, and I was thinking about it earlier and realized, there are a lot of really good college football teams out there that will lose a really dumb game at somewhere in their schedule. And I mean, I think last year was the Pitt game. Like, I can't explain that other than that's just college football, is that you're just going to go out there. Pitt's going to hit on every, they're going to hit double sixes on every dice roll, and, something dumb's going to happen. And you lost by 17 points or whatever it was.
I think that like what we're talking about here, you said like that's college football. It is college football. And like the thing to me that makes Nick Saban unbelievable as a coach, they never just got their shit kicked in. You almost always were like, I'm so like we stole this one. Always. Like whenever you beat them, and they never lost they didn't lose those games. They never were just like, y'all better wake up because you're losing to Mississippi State by 17. Like they never did that. Never. And it mystifies me how Nick, and that's like that part, like Kalen DeBoer is probably awesome. But Nick Saban is the only coach I've ever known who basically got a team every day, all the time to be like that. And I learned this from watching Louisville try to like live past Rick Pitino, who did the same thing. That like it's just not automatic that the next coach is going to be as good at that.
Yep,
it's not. And you take it for granted once they're gone. Like when you have your team is coached by one of those guys who just gets it. So we'll see.
Yeah, can find a way to keep that edge and keep guys focused and dialed into what's going on weekly. And again, I think other than that Pittsburgh game last year, I felt like Jeff Braun did a pretty good job of that. There were a couple of
they started to kind of hit the wall, I think, emotionally. If you look at them kind of down the stretch, like they really were lucky to get out of the Virginia game with a win. The Miami game, like Miami was really kind of reeling down the stretch, and they played great against Louisville. Louisville was really lucky to get out of there. And then you lose the Kentucky game, and you lose the freaking ACC championship game. Like they were sucking wind kind of down the stretch. And I do think it was one of the weird hallmarks of Scott's teams is they would lose early. And it would just take all the wind out of the whole year. But they would basically play like carefree football for the rest of the year. And so you get to the end of the year and you're like, where the hell was this? But they could only play that way once all the pressure was off. And it did feel to me like Jeff's team last year was like, what's with all this pressure? And like the longer the year went on with expectations and all that stuff, the less they really liked that. And I wonder if part of the work that got done on the roster this year was just like more work done on like guys who can handle the grind of sort of being the hunted, to use something cliche.
Yeah.
I think they kind of did get tired of it by the end of last year.
No, it makes sense. You look at the schedule coming off a 10-2 regular season. Equal, dare I say better, equal, or worse this year? What do you think in record prediction wise?
I think they'll probably go 9-3. I think they'll be a lot better in some areas, and I think that they won't be as home running the ball, obviously. And they just I think they play a lot better teams, this year than they played in a bunch of games a year ago. And so, I'm hopeful this year that what they'll do is not lose the Pitt game, so to speak. They, don't lose any of those other games. And then the schedule basically comes down to how do you do? That's 8 wins in the kind of the non-ranked teams on your schedule. And then the entire schedule comes down to how do you do in the 4-game schedule of at Clemson, at Notre Dame, Miami, and at Kentucky. And I'm basically saying they'll win one of those.
Okay.
And if basically like if they go 9-3 and they beat Kentucky, that's a great year. People will take that to the bank all day, every day.
Dancing in the streets. Yeah.
Yeah. Whatever the number is, one of them ones has got to be Kentucky. It's, we did have this discussion on the show yesterday. There's not a successful season scenario that includes a loss to Kentucky. I can't. It has to happen.
Yeah.
And I think Jeff feels the same way.
No, understandable. I mean, the way that series has gone in the last several years, and realizing that Kentucky is not on the upswing here. I mean, if anything, a little bit on the downswing. I mean, their coach almost left them, tried to leave them last year.
Well, and last year's game, like they outgained them nearly 2-1. You know, and you have a fumble deep in your own territory, you give up freaking kickoff return for a touchdown. You know, just I wonder what all of the tone is about the whole year if they literally like just don't lose that game. If they go to Charlotte 11-1, how do they play differently? You know, having kind of gotten over that hump. Is Florida State treated differently if they beat an 11-1 Louisville team that also beat Kentucky? Like a lot could have been different if they had kind of finished the job in that game. And you know, Calipari got away before Louisville sort of got things turned around on the basketball side, and I'll be pissed off if they don't get their lumps in on Stoops before he gets out of there too.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. One of the things we've talked about, and specific to that game, I guess, is I think one of the things that they've really struggled with in that game in recent years is size in the trenches in particular. And that's where Kentucky has been able to dominate that game. Is that somewhere that you feel like that they are better equipped this year, maybe than in a lot of recent years, to be able to handle that game in particular?
You know, I thought last year, not 2023, but 2022, that was true up until from 2019 to 2021, 2018 to 2021. Like they really were getting kind of mashed, you know, up front. And Scott Satterfield really had kind of hoped to have this really quick one gap defense, and Kentucky was like, well, how about we be quick and huge, and then you're screwed. But I felt like last year's game and this year's game that they just played, Louisville held up fine up front. Like I said, outgained them, got pressure on the quarterback, you know, all that stuff. They couldn't block Deion Walker, but like that's not a size. That's like he's a first round NFL draft pick kind of thing. Yeah. But I mean, you do got to do better there. I mean, you do. Yeah. But you know that whole narrative, like that wasn't unfair, you know, up until last year. But last year's is the first one where, in a long time, where I felt like they did that to themselves. They did get pushed around. 2022, 2021 for sure. You know, Scott's first year, they totally wilted. You know, in that game, 2018, they fired Bobby and they didn't care.
Yeah,
but it just goes to show you like just how insane the rivalry can be sometimes. 2016 Louisville, you know, you win the Heisman and you lose that stupid game. And it's infuriating. 2017, you go back there, don't punt. Beat them 41-17 and don't punt the whole game. They throw in a trash can at Lamar Jackson, and you're like, we're going to beat these guys forever. And you don't win again after that.
Yeah, that's.
And in 2017, you don't punt. 2018, Kentucky doesn't punt.
Yeah.
Like in back-to-back games, like that's how quickly things can just sort of get lopsided. And I think a lot of Louisville fans are like, it's about time for it to come back the other way.
Yeah, time for us to get ours, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I look at the schedule and some of the way that I'm thinking about win totals right now is like, you know, I would probably put this at like 8.5. I think you're kind of picking between.
I've seen that everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you're picking between 8 or 9 wins. I'd be surprised if they only won 7. I'd be surprised if they won 10. You know, it's like, I think they find, you know, it's either 8 or 9. I'm wearing a Louisville shirt. I've got family roots in Louisville, Mark. You know, let's be optimistic. Let's take 9-3. I'll agree with you. And I think, again, coaching wise, you know, again, they beat Notre Dame last year. Like they
beat Miami last year.
They beat Miami last year. You know, they've got the ability, I think, to knock off some of these teams. Just because they got a number next to them doesn't mean that Louisville can't beat them. You know, so
yeah. And look, like a lot of the Virginia Tech's a real trendy pick. Like Louisville beat the hell out of Virginia Tech last year, dominated that game from start to finish. You know, and you know, Duke was good last year. Louisville dominated Duke start to finish that game. You know, last year Riley Leonard was kind of hurt, but like they beat them up, like they controlled that game. So like Louisville beat up on some pretty good teams last year too.
Yeah, I mean Boston College made a bowl game, and it was only a 28-point game. It wasn't that close.
Like if you would have told me after that game, the Boston College is going to make a bowl game, I'd be like, you're on drugs. Like it was amazing what they did down the stretch. Props to them for that.
Yeah, Mike and I had a lot of fun with Boston College fans last year, so
I'm sure.
we'll see. That's the Friday night game. That might be the red bandana game, which, as we keep going back to. Be careful with that one. That's a spot.
How satisfying was last year as a Georgia Tech person?
Man, it was a weird year because, again, I mean, they had a lead on
almost
Louisville
ruined Louisville's year, like in the opening.
yeah. I mean, you had that going.
Did you hear Jeff Brom's great story in that game, by the way?
Yeah,
completely. His daughter. Did you hear that? Like his daughter was crying at halftime.
No, I didn't.
It's like he's going to the locker room and his daughter's crying at halftime, and he's like, what's wrong? She's like, if we lose, when I go back, like I won't have any friends. And Jeff Brom said Jeff Brom told her, if we lose, I won't have any friends. So, Georgia
valid
Tech,
point.
I was impressed with. I had a feeling though. I did. I had a feeling they were gonna. Make progress.
Yeah, that's growing pains for Georgia Tech for sure. I mentioned there was a 4-week span for Georgia Tech where they played 4 games where the spread was double digits and the underdog won every one of them, and they went 2-2. Meaning they won against North Carolina and Miami as double-digit underdogs, and they lost to Boston College and Bowling Green as double-digit favorites. Yeah, so it's like, what do I make of this? Like, you're able to knock off powerhouse teams, and you're able to lose dumb ones. They played Georgia about as close as they've played them since 2016. Yeah. Some of the stuff that Buster Faulkner was doing on offense late in the year with Haynes King and some of those guys. Very cool, innovative, impressive. So
I know there was some talk that Kentucky was interested in him. I was like, I don't need that.
Yeah, no, definitely not. Definitely not. So, yeah, I mean, it was one of those things. It was kind of a mixed bag, but I think overall you're seeing some building going on, and hopefully, you take another step forward this year. But, somewhat the same thing from Louisville, but I don't know that there was really a lot of build as much, or, year over year build as much as be good and stay good, kind of from the get-go is what it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, look, was the schedule good, like friendly last year? Yeah, but like they also took advantage of it.
Mm-hmm.
They handled Notre Dame start to finish.
Yeah,
and that I hate the fact that the last 3 games of the year, especially the bowl game, which definitely doesn't matter, is kind of used. I feel like to dismiss the whole year, but them's the breaks.
Well, that bowl game, I was also irritated because it was like that was by a mile the best defensive game that USC played all year. Like all of a sudden they start tackling, and then you've got like the 3rd string quarterback who's just hucking it, and just like Louisville had defenders perfectly placed all night, and he's just throwing it right through their arms somehow. Like that was almost annoying to watch, as a Louisville fan. Like they're not even really doing anything wrong. It just USC is just on fire all of a sudden.
Yeah. Wasn't fun.
No, definitely not. So we'll end on that note, I guess. All right, 9-3 for the both of us. I think another good year, tougher schedule, but again, Louisville, I think, kind of establishing themselves.
The right 9-3 could have them back in Charlotte.
Yeah, completely. Very much a lot of like getting used to with this new ACC, and I mean, 17 teams, and you're definitely like you're only playing half the rest of the conference, and it's we'll talk about this on a season preview and such, but like I'm already exhausted that with every team we're talking about, oh, it's a relatively easy schedule, or oh, it's a kind of a hard schedule. Like why can't we just do you play all the other teams in the Atlantic just like all the other Atlantic teams, or it's quickly getting exhausting. So definitely something we got to consider for every single team and trying to figure out who's going to make the Charlotte. But to your point, yeah, I mean you could lose to Notre Dame and Kentucky, but go 7-1 in conference, and you're right back there in Charlotte.
Yeah, as long as that one probably isn't to Miami, you're probably in.
Yeah, absolutely. So should be
no matter what. I think the thing that unites all fan bases in the ACC is that they want SMU to beat Florida State. That's all everybody wants. That's the only thing everyone is united about.
The most hilarious thing possible would be SMU knocking off Florida State. That would
just
be
to
fantastic.
See if the ACC would add it to the lawsuit, right? Like file some sort of a motion or updated whatever.
That needs to make it into court proceedings somehow. Mm-hmm. Is that y'all lost to the new guys,
to the guys that you cited in the lawsuit as reasons for being able to get out?
Yep, absolutely. Last question before we get out of here. Was there any personal slight that you or you feel like the fan base maybe felt that Louisville was the top team in the also receiving votes of the AP poll and Iowa got in at 25?
Yes. Yeah, freaking yes. I don't know how you make the distinction between teams. I don't know, 22 to like 27 or whatever. I think Louisville fans secretly like being overlooked a little bit.
Yeah.
So they're kind of okay with this. They want both. Louisville fans want to be acknowledged and overlooked at the same time, like most fan bases, right? Like that's what you want.
Complicated existence.
More than the top 25, I will say though, I do think that like in terms of like preview materials or whatever for the ACC, it does feel like last year kind of like didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give you a good example. Stuart Mandel, this is not a criticism, just an observation. His preview of the ACC mentions that Louisville was the runner-up. It says that the conference is basically Florida State, Clemson, Miami, and then there's a second kind of tier of runner-up Louisville, NC State, Virginia Tech, and maybe SMU.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't mention Louisville for the rest of the freaking thing at all.
Mm.
And picks them to go 8-4. But there's a section in which he says, like, here's a kind of a quick synopsis of the contenders. Doesn't do Louisville. And then the new guys, and mentions the new guys. Like, mentions NC State, mentions Virginia Tech, Florida State, Clemson, Miami. Why? And like, I feel like that's been happening a lot. So,
yeah.
But I bet you Jeff Brom kind of likes it. So
yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, any decent coach worth his salt, is going to be able to put that on a bulletin board and point at it every day in the locker room.
It's not contrived. Like, am I reading too much into it? Maybe, but it's not like made up. It's not like Dabo trying to be like, no one believes in us when they're top 10 every year or whatever.
Right? Yeah. The whole, what was it? The Georgia player after the national title, they picked us to go 7-5. No, they did not.
No one did.
Yeah.
No one. Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyways, Mark, this has been a lot of fun. Really appreciate your time as always. You have been incredibly gracious with your time. You want to tell the people real quick where they can go find your stuff?
Sure. We're at 93.9 The Ville, 3 to 6 every Monday through Friday. You can find us online at 93.9 The Ville, and I'm at Mark Ennis on X for as long as that trash ass platform exists.
Yeah. One of these days, we're going to have to agree to move elsewhere because, it's getting worse by the day.
Yeah, it's kind of like the more it becomes like aggressively propagandistic, I'm like, I don't know if I want to keep doing this.
So many ads and yeah. So,
Cheech and Chong, if I buy something, will you stop? Those ads are everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. At Mark Ennis on Twitter. Mark, really appreciate your time as always. We will come back. We're going to keep previewing. We got a few more teams left. We're almost there. We're going to try to get all these done by the week 0 game. Georgia Tech and Florida State and Ireland, and then SMU taking on someone off, not there on the top of my head. But we're going to preview those games after we get done previewing all these teams. So keep it tuned here. Again, we're on Twitter. We're on Instagram, Facebook, all those good places. Go find us at BC Podcast ACC. Send us an email, basketballconferencepodcast@gmail.com. youtube.com/at the ACC Football Podcast. Go hit the subscribe button. We'd really appreciate that. And come hang out with us as we go through this season. Mark, thank you again so much for your time. We'd love to have you on again sometime soon.
Anytime, buddy. Anytime.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. All right. Until next time, for Mr. Mark Ennis, I am Joey Weaver. Thank you guys so much for listening. We will talk to you again very, very soon. Until then, go Cards and go ACC.